Delighted to welcome my friend and community member Vishal, who's written a fascinating book, The Smart and the Dumb, talking about the educational adventure or misadventure in India and other similar countries. Vishal has been a community member of Network Capitals from the beginning. And after that, he went to Harvard. He's changed careers multiple times, so makes him an ideal guest to discuss that and his book today. Welcome, Vishal. Quite a lot has happened
Yeah,
since your first masterclass on Network Capital. How are you?
yeah, it's been a while, Utkarsh. More than what, 5 years, I think, or 4 years since.
Yes, 4 years. Yeah, right
Four
after
years.
you got your Harvard admit, I think you did one.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, it's four plus years now. Yeah, pleasure to be
Yeah.
back. Like I keep telling you, it's very inspiring to be a part of a community like this. I benefited quite a lot from the initial times Network Capital had the Facebook group, and in fact, like I told you, I think a few days ago, one of the chapters from the book came from a post on that group. So just excited to give it forward and to have this conversation.
Well, thank you. We're going to talk about that, of course. But just briefly tell me about your career. Were you always interested in education? Were you always a very good student? Did people think you're going on to write a book and the works?
It's never an easy answer, and in retrospect, things always make sense. But yeah, I was interested in education from a very young age. I did, if I would say, funnily enough, I did a bachelor's in mechanical engineering in Chennai, and I didn't really enjoy it, and so I started teaching at the age of 19. And for the next 6 years, I was a teacher. I taught more than 2000 plus school children between the ages of 9 to 15 or 16 in like 6 different cities. Like I had a education startup in Chennai where we were teaching public speaking and debate and using public speaking and debate to teach history, philosophy, economics. I was doing that, and then I figured I wanted to work in a more wanted to dwell a lot more into education and understand it from various other aspects, and that's how I decided to take forward a different career path, and I did a master's in education policy at Harvard, which was a very formative time. I was young. I was very influential, if I could say so. And yeah, like I started studying policy there. But also at the same time, I started becoming very interested in philosophy and sociology of education. And Harvard provided that ground for me to just explore however I wanted. So it was basically a master's. It was a 1 year master's to basically go. They were like, go study whatever you want. And that was, and it just has so many courses which you can take, which really is I think the hallmark of an education like that. And yeah,
Hmm.
then I came back. The pandemic hit, and my plan was always to come back anyway. I did not want to work abroad. I wanted to come back to India. I worked with this political party called the Dravida Munnetra Kazhagam, the DMK in Tamil Nadu, for as a political consultant for its 2021 state elections. And then by the time that was a very informed choice. It may seem like a very weird jump to go from studying education to working in politics, but by the time I had started the masters itself and having taught a lot of children, I started understanding that education is very much a political act, and I wanted to explore politics in a very different front, not just from an educational front, but like from how uh, people interact with quote unquote politicians, and how electoral politics like really plays a role in people's lives. So I went with that broad question, and yeah, it was a very interesting experience to work for over a year with the DMK. I was basically a campaign manager, traveled to around 40 plus constituencies in the state, handling different senior leaders' campaigns. It was a very interesting insight into how politics works. And I was like, and I also have a habit of not staying in a place for too long. My curiosity kind of was satiated. It was also, as you can imagine, a very difficult working environment. So I switched. I decided to get back into academia. What happened? What at Harvard, the intellectual stimulation was, I must say, quite. I was missing it. Like, let's do a PhD, but I did not know what to do a PhD in. I did not
Hmm.
know where to start, and I was in the wilderness for a really long time. I got rejected from all the PhDs I applied for, and I was like, okay, we need to go back and work again because this needs something to do to make a living. And I worked with the Tamil Nadu government with the Department of School Education, as a project manager to manage this new scheme, scheme that the Tamil Nadu government had come about called the model schools, which is basically they wanted to set up one model school in every district across the state and basically get the creme de la creme of all public school students in Tamil Nadu, bring them to this model school and train them, to excel in life, which is also a proxy for them to excel in entrance exams, which until then the Tamil Nadu government till today has a very strong opposition towards it. They don't want, they don't believe in entrance exams, and they don't want their the students of the state to write entrance exams. So very interesting opportunity. And then I applied for PhDs again, and yeah, now here I am at Cambridge doing a PhD in sociology. I feel like I am where I want to be now. So it's been a journey and a half, but yeah, it all works out in the end, I guess.
Journey and a half indeed. So engineering, then education policy, then sociology, and here you are at Cambridge as a Gates scholar. So congrats on everything that you've done. Um, Tell us about the smart and the dumb, and why did you call education political?
Oh, wow. Well, I'll answer your second question first. It's a topic quite close to my heart, and it's also at the crux of what I was going for in the book. I think the idea first of the idea of education is something I write in the introduction as well. It's for many people, and I don't blame them. It's like it's a process of sending someone to school or going to school. Something happens inside the school for like 12 to 15 years. You come out with some credentials, then you go for higher education, and then you get a job. That's broadly how education in a market-based society has been understood to be, and it has its benefits. I do not blame that. But the very act of education is, first up, for me, it's less of a noun and more of a verb. It's a process. And in that process, there are some key questions like what to teach is inherently a very political question, and how to teach is also becomes a very, very political act. In that process, for example, I was just reading yesterday on literacy, like the very simple basic idea of teaching someone to read or write. At the same time, it can be a process of regulation, of control, and it can also be a process of providing opportunities for liberation, for resistance, for solidarity, for empowerment. So these are all like very deeply ingrained acts, and we often take these for granted. And it's something that I bring through a series of stories in the book. I try to show that, like it's education is very much a process that is used to define what the common good is, where a society should be heading, how our values, our shared values of whatever we means, how it should be aligning. So it in the modern day and age, education policy is also a citizen making or a nation building project as well. So these are all very political acts, and it's not just a process of going to school, getting some credentials, getting a job, and then continuing on with life. There's a lot more to that. And so my book, The Smart and the Dumb, questions that what are these. We go into this process of education with particular promises. So I question what are these promises and whether these promises are being upheld. So for example, in India, I think there's a very serious paradox that's happening. India's gross enrollment ratio for primary education is at more than 100%. That is, every child in India at primary school level is going to school. And then, of course, there are dropouts, and that's comparable with many other countries. But if now every child is going to school, at the same time, India is having a massive unemployment crisis. So many other developing countries in the world have very similar statistics. There are huge problems with job creation, with sustaining jobs, or with like even, from primary school to higher education gross enrollment, which drops like by around 80 percentage points. So there are some promises that are not being fulfilled. And my question in the book was, what are these promises? Whose needs does education serve? What does education do? Were some inherent questions with which I started writing this book. And the book is a collection of 7 stories of my travels across the country in search of an answer to this question. What does education do? Whose needs does it serve? What are these promises, and whether these promises are being upheld or something else is happening. So it has stories like how a ban on toddy tapping in Tamil Nadu, which is a native form of liquor, how a ban on that kind of production of that liquor is having an effect on education choice, how sometimes education as a process affects child marriage in Rajasthan, in some cases causing child marriage itself. How mothers who have children with ADHD or autism, how do they understand what a normal education is? So there's like the idea also of the book was to kind of humanize the process of the stakeholders involved in it, what they feel, what they experience, how it affects them. Because education doesn't exist in a vacuum. It exists in a field of forces. A lot of different social, cultural, economic forces have an impact on education, and education has an impact on them. And I had a sense that during my time at Harvard and after also, that like these were processes that were being taken for granted, and perhaps it'd be interesting to shed some light on it.
How did you decide that Smart and Dumb was the title to go with?
So, well, funny story. I got rejected over the course of 2.5 years. I finished this book actually a very long time ago. I was rejected by over 12 publishers over the course of 2.5 years from.
And you were doing cold outreach. You
No, I had an
pitching
agent as well.
cold.
I had a good agent. But no, like the content was not being received. And the initial title of the book was actually "What's the Point?"
Hmm.
I mentioned that in the introduction of my book as well. What's the point? And the idea of like the title was to question what the point of education was. But I got like from whatever little feedback I got from all these rejections, when you get rejections often for jobs or like for applications, you don't really know why they rejected you. From the very
Hmm.
little feedback I got, like I kind of surmised that maybe this title is a little too defeatist, that people, it's directly confronting this very sacred process that like we all, no matter who we are or where we are from, we think education is our way up socially, economically. It is the engine for mobility. So perhaps it was attacking it too directly. So then I changed it, and then while I was working on the book also, I didn't want it to just be a collection of 7 disparate stories. These stories had to tie in together into a broader idea. And the notion that like, and this is something I've been working on, I work on in my PhD as well, is this question of epistemic understanding and epistemic justice. That is
Hmm.
the central thesis and the reason for the title also, without wanting to reveal too much, is that even if education can solve a lot of problems, and it does, I'm not a critique of these processes. I'm a major beneficiary of it. My point is that it still creates a class of people. As much as it promises to be a bridge, it can at the same time create new divisions or differences. And like one of these very difficult divisions to overcome is the division of the smart and the dumb, which the process of education is very deeply embroiled in. There is a class of people who are the smart, who are being able to benefit from globalization, who have been able to benefit from greater access to opportunities, and the dumb who deserve their fate. And this is, as we see in society more and more today, the rise of a lot of different forms of opinions coming out in very, very polarized manners. I would argue that, like, and this is not a very, very it's not like a mind-blowingly original argument that I've come up with. Like, this has been discussed quite a lot in sociology, in political science for a while also, that there is a simmering discontent amongst a very large group of people who have had access to education but are not able to do much with it. And so we're creating this divide. We, the smart, are creating this divide of the smart and the dumb. Is like a broader idea of the title, and that's how the title came about. Also, the title is still, I would say, my editor and people at Penguin were like, "Can we try changing? Come on!" I was like, "Sorry, no. I think we have to stick with it because it's an important point that we'd like to we should reconcile with, irrespective of however difficult it may be to palate."
Yeah, the title is definitely evocative. You get the
Mm-hmm.
point. And even
Mm-hmm.
What's the Point has a very Pink Floyd, like
Yeah.
another brick in the wall kind of a feel. So well done. The book seems to be doing really well. I would love for you to tell us which chapter was sparked by some interactions on Network Capital
Oh, yeah.
and what did you discover?
Yeah. So the second chapter, called Guns for Christmas, which is a chapter on, it's basically it was when I was traveling in Manipur during peacetime. I was in Manipur and Nagaland between 2019 to 2021 over the course of different trips. And in fact, I had just put a post on Network Capital saying, hey, I'm writing a book like this. And I was curious to, understand a little bit more about Manipur. If somebody could just talk to me on the phone about something like this. And the main character in the chapter, who I name M, he reached out to me. He's like, hey, I saw your post on Network Capital, would love to talk. And a phone conversation, he was like, bro, come over here as soon as you can. So actually, like 5 days later, I was on a flight to Imphal, and I spent a solid 3 weeks with M, traveling over must be more than 1,000+ kilometers over those 3 weeks over there. So you're very you chances are created when you have good institutional and structural support. So I think that's
No,
how.
thank you for talk. But you've talked about the second chapter. I'm interested in you telling us who the book is dedicated to, and how
Oh,
do you decide to structure such a complex subject? Because there's so many directions in which you can take this. Smart and the Dumb, the politics of education. What was your approach?
so again, hindsight is a gift when you have a finished book in hand. The process of this was, for initially I did not like how the book. I had no idea how the book was going to come together. My inspiration for writing this kind of work was uh, based on a lot of classic works of narrative nonfiction. So I had read
Such as?
quite a few. Saman Subramaniam, who is this very famous author, journalist. He's like his first book called Following Fish, which was a series of travels across the Indian coast where he's basically eating fish and connecting fish and culture. That was a major inspiration, and there are a lot of others also. The Good Girls by Sonia Falero, or Beyond the Beautiful Forevers by Catherine Boo, basically, which really brought about, it used the techniques of literary fiction with like in-depth journalism, long form writing to really evoke particular ideas. So my idea was like, let's just do education journalism. And then the more I started writing, I was like, there has to be, I'm not deep diving into one point. For example, there's a book, okay, maybe I think, let's take Killers of the Flower Moon, which was about the Osage murders, which now is this Oscar winning film. It was an in-depth, detailed view into, you know, human ideas of like conquest, of capturing, of greed, these basic emotions. And I wanted to see if like I can do that in education journalism. And then after writing the third chapter, which was about toddy tapping and education choice, I was like, wait, there is a very clear through line here that dignity and the promise of education, that education can provide dignity, is not coming through. That, like we have to somehow bring it all together, that education is closely linked to ideas we hold very dear to us, like status, like merit, like distinctions. These are, and like, so the evocative emotions behind it slowly started coming together as I started writing more and more chapters. So by the time I had written the fourth and the fifth chapter, I knew that the broader trends I wanted to, the broader macro structure or the framework I wanted to focus on was globalization, state and the status anxiety that comes with it, and how we understand success and merit through education. I was like, all right, this is what we are going for. So let's put the stories together in a particular way. And to answer your first question on the dedication,
Mm.
this book's dedicated to a professor of mine at Harvard who did this very the only word for it is unique, who did this very unique course called Critical Theory, Identity, Power, and Practice, I think. Yeah. But it had nothing to do with the Frankfurt School of Critical Theory or anything like that. It was basically a way for you to understand how education was deeply embedded in the political and deeply embedded in our personal action. So it was a very reflective kind of course. And like, I didn't discuss the book directly with him during my time at Harvard, but it gave me that course and my interactions with him, and he's been a very dear friend ever since. uh my interactions over the course of the last 4 years with him kind of have been the intellectual bedrock of my work. So it really, I couldn't dedicate it to anybody else there.
I appreciate that. You talked about education becoming political. I look at education in two phases. One is pre-admission, and
Mm-hmm.
second is what happens once you enter. Now,
Mm-hmm.
before you enter, for most people, most of the time, education is about the GMAT score, the GRE score, the SAT score, the entrance examination, maybe the percentages. And once you get in, then maybe it's about other things, the access to employment opportunities, social network, a way to build cultural capital, and what have you. Do you think that the former is also political, the
Oh,
entrance part of it?
100%. In fact, like I have an entire chapter in the
And
book.
perhaps you can guess why I'm asking this question.
Oh, yeah, yeah, yeah. Absolutely. I don't think there's anywhere where we can particularly look at this and say it's an objective, these entrance exams are objective measures of talent or merit or success. There are deeply imbricated, often invisibilized mechanisms that go into determining success through objective mass entrance exams. Now there's a whole different debate on exams itself, but I wanted to clarify one point which you started
Because
off.
there's a chapter to enter entrance
Yeah,
exams, and you're
absolutely.
from
I'll
Chennai.
touch on that in just a second.
Yeah.
The idea of education being closely tied to school is in itself first something that I really wanted to challenge in the book, because a school or a college or a university, any method of a formal mechanism in which you can bring a group of learners together in one physical space is only one tool of education. And one of the things I tried to bring together over the course of the 7 chapters is that there are a lot more sides to education than just the school, like your immediate environment, your family, your socio-economic location, the kind of your friends, the location, like the geographical location you're in, they're all sites of education. And we learn, and again, education is, I don't want to take to be arrogant to say I can define what education is, but it's more easier, or it's more important to kind of make the distinction that education is not just schooling or the processes that happen while a student or a learner is in school or college. um, Now, coming to the entrance exam point, like there's a chapter in the book called To Enter Entrance Exams, where I detailedly point out where in Kota, which is considered one of the coaching hubs of the country in Rajasthan, or in Hyderabad, which is also another emerging, it's now a tech hub, and it also has this thriving culture for students taking entrance exams, primarily for medicine and for engineering in India. To get into facilities or to get into institutions that coach you for entrance exams, you have to write entrance exams. And the processes that happen inside it is such a way that you are particular traits, very specific traits that are again not natural, not necessarily just natural. Let me clarify, but continuously constructed by through a variety of factors, mostly influenced by sociocultural upbringing, through access to parental access to knowledge and literacy. All of these things play a role, and these are kind of then invisibilized. So there's a lot of very interesting sociological work on the role of exams. In fact, Karthik Muralidharan, an economist who I think would be a fascinating add to your podcast and to your community. Uh,
You've actually written to
says
him
that,
once. Yeah.
yeah. So he says he says it very interestingly. Entrance exams, education broadly has, like, 2 or 3 large functions. You first have human capital, like where through education gain more skills, which you can then convert to get jobs, or or you can signal to your employer based on your credentials. That's function number 2. The third function is a sorting function, where you're able to sort people based on particular ideas of merit and success. And that's what these entrance exams do. But interestingly, who defines what merit is or what success is a deeply political question. And today in India and many parts of the world, in Bangladesh as well, you are seeing severe discontent with like these notions of success and merit. So I wouldn't say I wouldn't take the functions of education or pre-admission and post-admission as independent processes. They very much exist in a very dynamic social environment. And my only call is to take that a lot more seriously.
Yeah. But let's stay on this point a bit more. We live at a time where knowledge of certain skills and fluency in certain skills does make you a bit more marketable, which means that you're probably going to be more employable, which means you're probably going to be earning a bit more. Um, Parents often want to send their kids to employable professions, especially in emerging countries, but now we see elsewhere as well. So you feel that talent in something like this is objective, and if entrance exams are an imperfect measure of success, which you seem to suggest, and I actually agree with, um, has there been work done, or have you done work to figure out an alternative which would be better off?
Ooh, that's a toughie, Utkarsh. I think I don't think we are at a stage to particularly consider alternatives, because every alternative that is suggested, it's like the head of a chimera. You cut off, or I may get the metaphor wrong, but basically you cut off one head of the snake, another head pops up somewhere. That's precisely the problem with any massive revolutionizing idea in education, because one power structure is eliminated and another power structure is created. I was speaking to, when I was working with the Department of School Education with the Tamil Nadu government, like I was reporting to two very senior IAS officers who had who were all like, I think during whenever they wrote the UPSC, they were like in the 100th or the 200th rank. This is with like 10 million people writing the exam, and they are in like the top 100 or 200. And they told me something which I still reflect on quite often. How would you, if you want to get the best of the best, how would you be able to discern that when 10 million people want to get those 1,000 jobs? So so I'm not opposed to the idea of an entrance exam, or neither am I opposed to the idea in any way of rewarding talent in a just manner. I think the real question comes is when, how do we decide what is just in rewarding, and what are the just mechanisms in rewarding talent? And if the mechanisms or the processes of the exam is fair.
Right.
That's the important question. I don't think we are looking to do away with this question of exams. I remember listening to one of your to a podcast that you did with Dr. Tarun Khanna of HBS. He wrote this book, Making Meritocracy. In that book, and a few other people's work, the idea of entrance exams is more than 1,000 years old. It's been done in China since perhaps the 800 or 900 AD. Exams are one of, if bureaucracy is considered as a measure of modernity, exams have been a key tool for bureaucracy. So I don't have a problem with the idea of exams in itself. Like if I weren't put to the test, if I weren't put to the test, I don't think I would be here where I am. It's not like I want opportunities doled out to me. But the important question is whether the processes for these exams are fair, and whether sorting based on talent and merit is happening in a just way. And this is of course a major philosophical and implementation conundrum. That's where it gets difficult, because you can have like an implementation policy oriented solution to it, which may not have moral or ethical justifications, and vice versa. So, which is where I say in the book also, I don't think the point is about finding a solution. It's more about engaging in this process democratically, because one person or a group of people figuring this out is again a way of reproducing particular structures that are kind of antithetical to the idea of rewarding talent in a just manner. More important, that I suppose as a larger group of people who are engaged and interested in these processes, we kind of start engaging in these ideas democratically. The solution may emerge sometime, but it's more important to figure the solution, to discuss viable solutions, rather than go with one solution and say this is it. It may work in other disciplines, in other fields. In a deeply imbricated process, a social process like education, I just argue that it does a little bit more harm than good. But I'm not opposed to policies oriented solutions to difficult conundrums in education. It just perhaps requires more consultations with a larger group of stakeholders.
Yeah, and you make an important point about the objective of the book, which is not to produce a 10-point solution to solve the education crisis. I don't think such a solution or a book would be very useful, because education is a multi-layered subject.
Mm-hmm.
For me, the highlight of discussing this book with you is to just figure out how to think about the problem. And
Mm-hmm.
ultimately, the solution will be decentralized. People will have
Mm-hmm.
to figure out some of it, with, of course, enabling infrastructure support from various organizations. You've done a really good job of naming the chapters. So the one that I'm really interested in is the one on a good mother.
Mm-hmm.
What was the point of the chapter, and what prompted you to name it as such?
I think that chapter is a chapter very close to my heart. The chapter is basically a bunch of interviews and some time I spent with a group of mothers who have children, young children under the age of 10, but when I interviewed them a few years ago, who were just navigating the conundrums and the difficulties of being first a woman, a primary caregiver of a child that is not conforming to, again, quote unquote, norms of society. And so in that process, what does it mean for them to provide education to their children? And how do they navigate being a good mother? And I think this is an important point, because in largely patriarchal societies, there are very gendered roles of how mothers should function. I have seen that with my own parents and with my partner's parents and so many other parents who, when I was a teacher as well, they're continuously navigating this like very deeply personal and difficult dilemma of like, am I good enough? Am I a good mother? Am I a good parent? You can't, like, if you have like a, your child is conforming to ABCD set of norms, you're good. But when your child is kind of intellectually and in some cases biologically off the norm, how do you relate to being a good mother? Was the idea of the chapter. The chapter came from the fact that my mother is a special educator herself. She's worked with dyslexic and autistic children for the last 20 years. So it, like, I have grown up seeing the interactions my mother has had with so many parents. And yeah, it was a natural chapter to fit into the book. It was not the first chapter that I wrote, but it was a chapter that I had in mind from the time the idea of the book came about. It's also an important, I think, a very Foucauldian and an interesting philosophical dilemma of how do you deal with a situation like ADHD, uh,
Mm.
attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. Because when I was growing up, I was a very, very notorious naughty hyper kid. Like, you couldn't sit me down for more than like 5 minutes in one place. I suppose I turned out okay, but like maybe today I would be diagnosed. I'm pretty sure I would have been diagnosed with ADHD. ADHD till today, at least from what my mother tells me and from the research I did for writing this chapter, has no known causes. We don't know if it's genetically caused. We don't know if it has something to do with pregnancy, a difficult pregnancy. It has no known cures except providing particular forms of suppressants or providing occupational therapy, etc., etc. It has, basically, we don't know what's causing it. We don't know how to cure it. We don't know what it is. So, but then there is a particular definition to it based on a particular set of medical or mental health authorities. And now parents have to navigate this conundrum as well. And I end the chapter with this very powerful quote from this mother who told me, I live for the word normal. I don't want anything special at all. I thought it's very interesting because we generally, a lot of us pursuing education want distinctions. I'm from Harvard, I'm from Cambridge, I'm special. But like, she was like, I live for the word normal. And I found that deeply powerful. And yeah, I suppose the good, you know.
Do you think that has something to do with culture as well? That is your next chapter, or at least the lens to look at the new chapter. But in certain societies, being a part of the tribe is the accepted way. And in
Mhm.
certain cultures, standing out is rewarded. People are much more open talking about their accomplishments or brandishing them. That is my dissertation at Oxford. So I'm very interested in how culture shapes achievement.
Yeah, yeah. It's a that's a again, you ask the good questions. The good questions are the ones where answers are not easy. Culture does play a part for sure. Again, culture of whom and how is this culture enacted and imposed is an
Hmm.
important question. As a sociologist, I am trained and I'm just bent to think that way. So I don't. It's very difficult for me to think of what culture is. I wouldn't think of
Hmm.
culture as a monolithic uh, noun. I would think of culture as a very continuously evolving set of practices that is continuously happening in interaction with a lot of other people. So yes, at the same point, when you're saying culture kind of incentivizes and encourages people to succeed, a lot of people are questioning culture as well. So culture is evolving and it is having effects. It's interesting to kind of dig a lot deeper into how particular microcultures, for example, where I'm from in Chennai, or where I'm from in Chennai is a good example. People are incentivized to go study engineering only, engineering or medicine. It's considered the culture of the place. It also has to, I think, it has a lot to do with institutional ideas. So if you take the North, for example, in Delhi, I know a lot of my friends today at Harvard and Cambridge, a lot of people went to DU. Engineering is definitely an option which a lot of people consider, but a lot of people consider doing a BA in history or a BA in English literature, political science. That in Chennai or in Tamil Nadu where I grew up, nope. If you did that, you were considered like, you're not smart enough to do engineering or medicine. There has to be a challenge to that kind of culture. And that challenge can come in one way from a very interactional kind of people talking with each other, but it has to also come from an institutional support, from an institutional support standpoint. We don't have very good public education for the liberal arts or humanities. There are some good private universities coming up, like Korea University, but they are largely inaccessible to a large group of people. So, like culture is again deeply permeated and deeply dynamic with both
Hmm.
personal and institutional interactions, and that's where it becomes political. So
Yeah. Uh, Before my MBA, I went to a really good university, Ashoka, you may know of. And at least from Ashoka, I don't know about Kriya. They do offer sort of a need blind kind of
Mhm.
scholarship. So if you get in, they try and follow the model that they'll cover the fee, which I think is a helpful way forward. But
Yeah.
the broader point that you're making is a good one. I will also add that even in the North, the expectation that you should have a marketable degree, in many
Yeah.
cases that does happen to be engineering, medicine, or stuff like that, is very much, or at least used to be until a few years back, the norm.
Mhm.
Only now, with the evangelism of liberal arts as an important way of looking at life and people finding more relatable success stories, have BA honors and some of these things become popular. In JNU, when my mom used to be there, and I was just like very young, I used to walk around sometimes. And on one of the walls, it was scripted by another examination. Um, God never fails. And below that, there was a line written, somebody scribbled, let him try UPSC. So there's a lot of emphasis in many cultures, but in definitely in the South, it seems it's even more acute.
So
Do you feel, sorry, please
I
go
just
on.
wanted to make a point there, and I say this in the introduction of the book as well. We often take these cultural elements as self-evident truths, that this is how things are. Zindagi AC hai. That's how
Hmm.
that's the attitude. And this is not a patronizing, I don't mean to have a patronizing view on this, but a lot of these things are not actually self-evident truths. And it
Hmm.
takes education, and by education, I mean learning, unlearning, relearning, to look beyond the fact that it is a constraint, and by a self-evident truth can often be a constraining factor. It takes a lot of learning, unlearning, relearning to look beyond it. And so a very small group of people are able to have the institutional support or have the interactional ability uh, within the eyes of social or cultural capital. They're able to do
Mm,
that. They're able to look beyond it. So
mm,
the larger, and this is where it becomes, this is where like there's really no solution I can offer. At best, like I can pinpoint to a particular set of issues.
mm.
uh, is this even a solvable problem is a much larger philosophical question, and it requires, it certainly does not, it's not going to do anybody any favors if I propose particular solutions to larger philosophical questions like this.
Oh, I appreciate this intervention. You also look at history to study the subject. Why and how is that helpful?
Yeah. So uh, interestingly, like even when I was in school, history was my favorite subject. uh, I think when I got to Cambridge first, at this lecture in the history department, someone told me that social progress is basically accumulated history, or how we understand the social world is basically through accumulated history. So always very interested in history, and this is where again the idea of textbooks for me always held this uh, deep deep notion of, like, it was very interesting. Like, I was reading this textbook as a kid. Of course I didn't know much as a kid. I was like, oh, this is like fascinating, and this is just speaks to you, so you take that again as a self-evident truth. But then when you step back later, you grow up and you have particular educational ideas, and you are a teacher also, you see that, like, there's a lot more to it than that. And I think it's very naive to think of school curriculum as neutral knowledge. It's not. School curriculum clearly has very deeply vested interests in it, and I had that experience firsthand when I wrote that. When I was invited by a school to this was when a long time back when I was a teacher. I was invited by this leading private school in Chennai to rewrite their textbook, whatever
Mm.
meant. And yeah, I was like very excited by the prospect, and yeah, it was like
I
it
mean, in
went.
all fairness, sounds like an amazing
Yeah,
project
yeah,
to
20,000
critically
words.
analyze the text. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So they basically wanted me to take off a bunch of chapters from the existing NCRT textbook that was prescribed to them and come up with something new, because the school had like the leeway for classes 6, 7, and 8 to kind of, do something else. So the more I started engaging in this process, a lot of different ideologies and a lot of different interests started clashing. Uh, and this was not an idea for the book in itself. This was something I had actually put at the back of my mind because it was actually a bad experience. I was very young also. I was 23, 24 when I was given this project, and now I'm a lot older.
Mm.
Uh, but I was like, wait, maybe instead of going and collecting some stories, it would be interesting for me to reflect on this chapter or on this myself, and kind of then bring a more theoretical understanding of what textbooks do. What is the role of textbook? And
Mm.
I spoke to Dr. Romila Tapla, was at, who was the author, one of the authors of the very first textbooks written in the 1960s. She and a group of other historians, and she has a bunch of papers written on this, which I cite in the book as well, um, about like what their process of education was. And so I emailed her and I asked her for a conversation, and we had this conversation, and she told me that, you know, I asked her, so why were in questions, why didn't the history textbooks necessarily include caste, or, some of the more deeper social problems of Indian society? And she's like, look, you need to understand that when we wrote the textbooks in the 60s, India was just rebuilding itself as a nation after seeing the horrors of partition and 200 plus years of colonialism. So we had a very clear choice to make between writing about the ills of Indian society, based on patriarchy, discrimination, prejudice, hierarchy, etc., etc., or whether we try to use this as a nation building project so that we can all feel, like we are one. This is coming in the context of a very fractured, very splintered country based on hundreds of different languages, the horrors of partition and all of that. And, like,
Mm.
it's a choice. So this choice in, like, so history textbooks are very much citizen building, regulating notions. So yeah, that chapter was a particularly interesting and a difficult one to write as well, to think of, which angle to take. I'm grateful to Dr. Thapa for, just pointing me in that direction. Like, you have, like, sometimes you have a choice, and that choice is a very, like, it's a difficult choice, but like, you take it and you have to move forward with it. The
Right.
vestiges and the legacy of it is something we're living with till today.
Yeah, one has to make strategic choices. Sometimes they're right, sometimes they're not, sometimes they're in between. That is life. One should lament within reason. But well done on getting in touch with her, and of course getting her quote. Despite some of the critiques she started receiving, nobody can doubt her scholarship
Yes.
and the
Yeah.
fact that she's done such incredible work for so long. Uh, Let me conclude by asking you who deserves what, and any broader points that you want us to think about as we read your book.
Oh, yeah, that question is at the heart, I think, of a lot of economic, socio-economic questions and processes that we are dealing with today. Does person A deserve more than person B? On what basis? And these are very old, difficult questions, and I only stand on the shoulders of giants. And I do not actually seek to answer this question. More so, I just seek to point out that the question of who deserves what is tied to educational opportunity and education quality. So in India, if you are having the notion that now every kid is going to primary school, there is very, very important data coming out that more than half of kids going to primary school can't even read a single line in English or their mother tongue, or are not even able to perform two-digit addition or subtraction. This is a very well established problem in education policy. It's learning poverty, the foundation literacy and numeracy crisis is perhaps the key problem in education policy, taught in every policy school in the world, tackled by almost every developing country's government. So you have, at one point, you're guaranteeing access to equal opportunity, but that seems to be a veneer. What's happening inside is a very, very different process, where the quality of education is deeply, deeply can be contended with. So who deserves what is a very, very I think it's at the root of a very democratic question, and it's at the root it's also a very existential question that we are facing today, because a large group of us, we feel like, yes, we are here because of our talent, our hard work. Fair. We do deserve all of that. There's a very large group of people being left behind as well. And education, the process that promised that it will bring everybody together, is not achieving that promise. So the question of who deserves what, it becomes a very vexed question. And you're seeing the manifestations of this in the rise of, ethno-nationalism, very extreme right-wing politics in different parts of the world. And you're seeing this as a continuous virtuous cycle, where like a particular set of quote unquote left-wing governments promise an antidote to again, quote unquote, right-wing radicalism, but they're not actually able to solve real problems of real people. So a group of very hardcore right-wing leaders are coming forth and promising a bunch of solutions based on triggering a particular set of emotions. And they are also not able to do that process very well. And so we're going through a continuous virtuous cycle of this. But the main problem remains, is the promise of education that it's supposed to provide dignity, it's supposed to provide access to employment, it's supposed to provide gainful jobs. Is it being realized? And where is this process of education being involved in a larger set of forces? It cannot be taken independently. So the question of who deserves what is very much involved in these larger set of questions. So I hope, like, the readers, your listeners, I hope they're able to somehow see this coming out in the book. If not, that's why I think podcasts help, and we're able to discuss this a little bit more in
No, it
detail.
definitely comes across. I can see Sama also shouting from the other room. Maybe she wants to ask questions as well,
Mm-hmm.
maybe soon. But thank you very much for this fascinating discussion, for all that you do for Network Capital. I'll obviously see you in a week or so
Sure.
in the UK before you head out. But is there anything I should have asked you that I didn't? Any quick closing comments, thoughts, reflections?
No, thank you again. No, I don't have any questions particularly. I'm good. Cheers.
Cheers, Vishal. Congratulations once more.
Thanks a ton, Utkarsh, and pleasure as always.